Tanya for the 22nd of Teves is in Perek Yud Daled, chapter 14. It's on Daf Chaf Amud Aleph. The number at the bottom of the page is 62, and we're at the beginning of a new paragraph. Until now, the Alter Rebbe explained the levels of Tzaddik, Beinani, and Rasha. Having explained the difference between their levels, we can now understand what the promise, the oath that the neshama takes before it's born, with its redundancy or seeming redundancy, where it says that it swears to be a tzaddik and to not be a rasha. Why is it necessary to have this double expression? So, in having described the difference between tzaddik and beinani, this double expression will now be clear and understood. With this that we learned above, we will now understand the double expression in the promise that the soul makes. Tehi tzaddik v'al tehi rasha. It is told to be a tzaddik and not be a rasha. Delechera tamuah. Because at first glance it seems unnecessary. After swearing that he will be a tzaddik, why does he then have to go on and also swear to not be a rasha? If you're not a tzaddik, if you are a tzaddik, then you're automatically not a rasha. Not only that, if you're a tzaddik, then you're not even a beinani, certainly not a rasha. So why is it necessary to say be a tzaddik and don't be a rasha? Hello, mishum she'ein kol adam zeichel liyes tzaddik. It is because not every person will merit to be a tzaddik. Ve'ein la'odam mishpat ha'bechira bazeh kol kach. And therefore it is not completely up to the person. He doesn't have freedom of choice in becoming a tzaddik, which would mean lehisanig al Hashem be'emes. To be a tzaddik would mean that he would have to take pleasure in God, and that should be his true pleasure. And the result of that would be that he would despise evil, and that would be a true despising. That would be a tzaddik. And not every person merits to have that level, and therefore, after swearing that it would be a tzaddik, it has to swear that it will not be a rasha. Al tehi rasha al kol panim. He should at least not be a rasha. So, he is made to swear that he will be a tzaddik. But since not everybody will be able to live up to that, he is then given the option of at least not being a rasha. Shebozeh, because in not being a rasha, mishpat habechir v'harishus nesuna l'chol adam, here every person does have the freedom and the choice and the permission limshel beruach taivasu shebelibei, to be able to govern the desires of his heart, v'lichbesh yitzrei, and to overcome his yetzer, shalei yehei rasha afilu sha'achas kol yamav, to not be a rasha even for a moment all his life. Bein bebechinas sur mira, bein bebechinas v'asei tev. Both in avoiding sin and also in doing good, he can always do what needs to be done, which means that even in the study of Torah, he can always study when he has the opportunity to study and never fail to take advantage of that opportunity, even though this is a difficult thing to do. So the first explanation is that you swear to be a tzaddik, but that may not be relevant to you because it may not be given to you. And therefore, if you're going to be among those who are not tzaddikim, then you take the second oath that at least you won't be a rasha. This, however, doesn't completely resolve the question, because if that were true, then those who were not intended to be tzaddikim shouldn't have to take that oath at all. Just skip that part of the oath. Just swear that you won't be a rasha. If the soul swears to be a tzaddik, then there must be some truth to that too. And it can't be that it doesn't apply to him at all. That's why the Alter Rebbe continues, Ach, afal pikein, but even after we've stated that not every person will be a tzaddik, not every person can be, In spite of this, tzarich likvei li'itim, a person has to set aside time, gamkein loshes eitzes benafshei, to find solutions, to find some way within himself, liyes meyes bara, to move himself to actually despise what is evil. Although he won't be a tzaddik, and he won't despise evil the way a tzaddik despises evil. The tzaddik despises evil because it is evil. Even the person who won't be a tzaddik has an obligation to do whatever he can to move himself to the place of the tzaddik. And as the Alter Rebbe will say later, you have to do what you can to be a tzaddik. If it was not decreed and it wasn't meant to be that you should be a tzaddik, that's up to God. That's God's business. So when you take the oath, when the soul swears, I will be a tzaddik, it can only swear for what it is capable of doing. It can only take responsibility for its options. And because it swears to be a tzaddik, it will do everything within its power to try to be a tzaddik. If it's not meant to be, then that's not a violation of his oath. That's beyond his control. That's up to God. And as the Alter Rebbe will say later, there are times when a person can, through effort, acquire at least some element of a tzaddik. Can in some way become similar to the tzaddik. So the person has to set aside times to find solutions within himself to bring himself to despise evil. As for example, the advice that the sages give, where the Gemara says that Isha chamas molitzeya, that a person should consider a woman as an undesirable and inelegant thing. Meaning to say, the desire for women. That a person who wants to despise evil, beginning with his attraction, with his desire for sexual things, the way that he prevails on himself to despise the evil is by seeing in the evil, in the sexuality, an element that is inelegant, that is distasteful, that is aesthetically not pleasant. And the same is true to other kinds of pleasure, where you find that element or that aspect of it that is in fact distasteful. Now, of course, this is not the same as the tzaddik. The tzaddik finds the evil distasteful because it is evil. The Beinoni is finding an aesthetic distaste, a personal distaste. But at any rate, this is the best a person can do to try to move himself to have a distaste for that which is evil. In fact, there's a statement in the Gemara that says that a person should never claim to be incapable of sinning. He shouldn't say, efshi, I can't sin. He should say instead, efshi, I can sin, but I won't because my Father in heaven decreed that I shouldn't. Even so, there are certain sins which a person should feel that he cannot do at all, even if it is not absolutely true. But a person who doesn't feel a distaste, a repulsion to at least certain sins is not a mensch. So even if it isn't 100% true, he doesn't despise even the ugliest of sins in the same way that a tzaddik despises any sin. But to be a mensch, for even minimal requirements, you have to have a distaste at least for certain sins. And how does a non-tzaddik have a distaste for sin? The distaste is an aesthetic one, or a personal one. And even that is of some virtue. The same is true also with other pleasures, foods and delicacies and so on, that the person wants to turn himself off to them. So the Gemara says, or the Mishnah says, consider what will be the end result. Nasim kachem asmoli. With all pleasures of this world, A wise person sees the end result, that in the end all physical pleasure is reduced to dust. The body decomposes in the grave, and there's nothing left to those pleasures. And in that way, the person comes to despise the falseness, the temporary deception of physical pleasure, and distances himself from it by turning himself off to that aspect of the sin that is unattractive and repulsive to the person. So, in the two parts of being a tzaddik, one is that he despises evil, the other is that he takes pleasure in godliness. So the person has to make some effort to turn himself off to evil, to be something like a tzaddik. And then also the opposite. The other part of being a tzaddik, to try to take pleasure and rejoice in godliness, by thinking about the greatness of God. Here, there is no physical solution. To turn yourself off to evil, you can think about the ugly aspects, the distasteful aspect of the physical. But in trying to produce a desire and a pleasure for godliness, here there is no gimmick. You have to contemplate God's greatness, kefi yechelte, each one according to his capacity, even though he knows within himself, he knows for a fact that he will not, in the end, reach a level of pleasure and joy in God that will be true on the level that a tzaddik's pleasure is true. It will only be imaginary pleasure that he takes in godliness. Imaginary meaning not lasting. Afal pikein hu yaseh shalei, yet he does what he can. He does everything that is within his power, l'kayim es hashvua, in order to fulfill, to uphold the promise that he made, shemashbiyim tehi tzaddik. See, he tries to keep his half of the bargain. He does whatever he can do to be a tzaddik. V'Hashem yaseh hatev be'enov, and the rest is up to God. So the second explanation that the Alter Rebbe gives is that not only will some people not be tzaddikim, and that's why they have to swear to at least not be a rasha, but that every person has to make some effort to be a tzaddik also. How do you try? What do you do to try to become a tzaddik? You turn yourself off to the unholy, and you contemplate God's greatness, hoping that God will enable you to actually take pleasure in godliness. And if God doesn't, then that's God's decision. But at least you did what you can do. V'aid, another thing about this pleasure that one takes in godliness, ha'hergel al kol davar shiltein. Sorry, this is talking about the despising of the evil. A higher way of despising evil, in that the despising of the evil will be a true one, not merely despising that which is unaesthetic or inelegant about the evil, is shahahergel al kol davar shiltein, habit rules, governs over everything, v'nasa teva sheni, and eventually a habit becomes second nature. Therefore, kishayargel l'mayis asara, when he gets into the habit of despising the evil, yihiyen nimas ktsas be'emes, then to some degree, to some extent, it will become truly despised. It's not just that he's despising because he finds something distasteful about it. He will despise evil itself. It will become a habit with him to reject that which is evil. And when he gets into the habit of rejoicing in godliness through contemplating God's greatness, then not that the habit itself will make the pleasure real. This is somewhat more difficult to accomplish, to take pleasure in godliness. But what happens is that if he does this and he does it consistently, then he might awaken a response above to his own initiative, v'kulahai v'ulai, and maybe, hopefully, ya'ore olav ruach mimoreim, there will be an awakening towards him from above, v'yizikel lebechinas ruach, and he will merit the presence of a ruach misherish eze tzaddik, from the source of the soul of a tzaddik, shetis aber bei, that it should be instilled or installed in him, laved Hashem b'simcha amitis, that will enable him to serve God with a true joy in godliness. In other words, his neshama will remain the neshama of a Beinani. Only into his neshama there might come an element, a spark, of the soul of a tzaddik, or the level of tzaddik, and that element of the tzaddik will not make him into a tzaddik, but will at least enable him to have a true joy in godliness. K'dichsiv simchu tzaddikim b'Hashem. As it says, tzaddikim rejoice in God. So this ability to rejoice in God is also in the realm of the tzaddik, the property of the tzaddik. But this can enter into a Beinani, and he can experience a true joy in godliness. V'tiskayim be'emes hashvua, and then the promise will be kept literally. Shemashbiyim tehi tzaddik, when he swore to be a tzaddik, he will actually be a tzaddik, at least to that degree in which he will have true joy in godliness. In the Hayom Yom for the 22nd of Teves, the Rebbe writes that my father, the Rebbe Rashab, once announced that a Farbrengen proclaimed that just as wearing tefillin every day is a mitzvah from the Torah that applies to every individual, regardless of what level of Torah he's on, whether he's a deeply learned man or a very simple man, the same is true also, that it is an absolute duty for every person to spend a half hour every day thinking about his children's education, and then to do everything in his power, and even beyond his power, to inspire his children to follow the path along which they are being taught to travel.